Perhaps right now your mind is carrying too many sounds, thoughts layered on top of one another, questions that never quite found their answers. The day has ended, your body has lain down, yet your awareness still doesn't know where to pause. This video was not created to offer you more information. It is not meant to help you understand more. It is meant to help you become lighter. Tonight, we will not try to explain the universe. We will simply listen to it, slowly, without urgency, without asking you to remember anything at all. James Webb will not appear here as a colossal scientific machine. It appears as a very new eye just opened in the dark. An eye that does not look in order to conquer, but looks in order to recognize this simple truth: the universe has always been larger than humanity's ability to organize it. In this quiet expanse, ancient galaxies will not offer you numbers. They whisper only something gentle, that not understanding everything is not a failure but a form of deep rest. And when you allow yourself to no longer need to know anything more, sleep will arrive the way the universe itself continues to expand silently without effort. Tonight, perhaps you have traveled very far, not with your feet, but with your mind. A day filled with sound, light, and ceaseless motion. And now, when the body is finally allowed to lie down, thought continues to drift quietly like waves that have not yet dissolved upon the surface of the sea. Let this moment slow itself. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to understand. Just breathe and be here. In the gentle darkness of night, the universe is no longer in a hurry to answer any question. It does not ask you to grasp meaning, nor does it pressure you to reach a conclusion. In this moment, the universe simply exists, vast, hushed, and patient enough to wait for you to settle into stillness alongside it. James Webb does not enter this story as a complex machine heavy with data and equations. It arrives softly, like an eye newly opened after humanity's long sleep. An eye not meant to inspect or judge, but to look and to accept that there are things which do not need to be neatly arranged within the mind. When that eye opens in the dark, it does not illuminate the universe the way electric light fills a room. It merely reveals gently what has always been there. Distant emptiness, ancient light, and one very simple truth: the universe was never made to be fully understood by human beings. Philosophy at its deepest point is not an effort to hunt for answers either. It is the permission to remain with a question without anxiety. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations Nowhere You Can Go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. Perhaps the quiet we seek has never existed out there among grand ideas, but within the ability to return to the small rhythm of breath unfolding right now. When you listen to the universe through James Webb, you do not need to see galaxies. You only need to sense a different rhythm, one that does not rush. The light Webb receives left its source billions of years ago. It does not arrive with urgency. It comes like an old memory moving slowly, not asking to be decoded, only to be received. Carl Jung once spoke of a kind of understanding that does not arise from reason, but from deep listening. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. In this opening chapter, we do not turn on more light. We simply sit with the darkness. And within that darkness, everyday tensions begin to soften, as though they too have grown tired of existing so sharply. You may notice that when you stop trying to understand, the mind becomes wider. Thoughts no longer crowd one another for attention. They drift past like galaxies moving through space without collision, without explanation. The universe in Webb's first gaze is not a perfect system. It is chaotic. It is surprising. It does not obey the expectations humanity once placed upon it. And yet precisely this brings a strange sense of relief. If even the universe does not need to be perfect, perhaps you do not need to strain to be clear in every moment. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." But tonight, the abyss does not look back to challenge you. It is simply there, silent, allowing you to look or not look as you choose. No demands, no tests, only presence. Let your breath slow. Let your heart find its natural pace again. There is no need to track every thought. They will settle on their own like dust falling in a room long untouched by wind. James Webb, at the deepest layer of this story, is not a symbol of knowledge. It is a symbol of humility, a gentle reminder that the farther we look, the more clearly we see our limits. And those limits are not frightening. They are where human beings are allowed to rest. Fyodor Dostoevsky once wrote in The Brothers Karamazov, "The mystery of human existence lies not in just staying alive, but in finding something to live for." Perhaps what we live for is not always a grand purpose. Sometimes it is simply the ability to sit quietly in a silent night listening to the universe without needing to know what it is saying. As you listen now, your eyelids may feel a little heavier. That is perfectly fine. You are not missing anything. This opening chapter carries no information you must remember. It only opens a very small door, a door that leads into silence. Beyond that door, the universe does not wait with explanations. It waits with its generosity. And within that generosity, you are allowed to release every effort to be clear. No need to understand, only to listen. And if sleep arrives before the story continues, that too is a natural way for the universe to close this first chapter with peace. If you are still here, perhaps the door of silence from the previous chapter has not fully closed. That is perfectly all right. We do not step into a new chapter with a sudden shift, but with a gentle drift, the way light itself moves through the universe. From that silence, something quietly unusual begins to appear. James Webb does not see farther than we do. It sees longer. The photons Webb receives do not come from places that are simply far away. They come from moments that passed a very long time ago. Before Earth had oceans, before the atmosphere learned how to hold life, before the idea of humanity had ever existed. That light left its source when the universe was still young. And it did not hurry. It did not rush. It simply traveled silently across an expanding space, across changes it could not know it was passing through, until billions of years later it touched a thin, golden mirror placed in the darkness by human hands. Here distance is no longer measured in meters or kilometers. Distance becomes time, and time for the first time becomes something that can be seen. Perhaps this reaches you in a very personal way, because human beings live like this too. We do not exist only in the present. We carry memories. Things that left long ago yet quietly return, usually on a night calm enough to listen. The ancient light Webb sees is like a memory that belongs to no one. It carries no name, no personal story. And yet when it arrives, we still feel something strangely familiar, as if we have been there before, or as if the universe itself is remembering itself. Henri Bergson, the philosopher of time and intuition, once wrote in Time and Free Will, "Time is not a thing which passes, but a process in which we participate." Perhaps when we look at ancient light, we are not merely observing the past. We are quietly taking part in it. In everyday life, we are used to thinking of time as a straight line, the past behind us, the future ahead, the present a fragile point we try to hold. But the universe does not think this way. Light knows nothing of before or after. It simply moves. And James Webb, by listening to light, offers us a very gentle lesson sometimes to understand something more deeply. We do not need to move forward. We only need to slow down. As you lie here, there may be old memories drifting through your mind, not clearly, not completely, like scattered fragments of light. They do not ask to be analyzed. They only want to be seen and then allowed to fade. Sigmund Freud once wrote in The Interpretation of Dreams, "Dreams are the royal road to the unconscious." And the ancient light of the universe is much like a dream. It does not tell its story in order. It does not explain. It simply appears carrying feeling more than information. What Webb sees is not a picture of the universe as it is now. It is a mirror of moments that have already passed. The galaxies it records may have changed, collided, distorted, or may no longer exist as separate entities at all. Yet their light still arrives, still speaks, still tells its quiet story. There is a deep comfort in that what has passed does not disappear completely. It only changes the way it is present. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "The past is not gone, it is transformed." The universe, through its light, shows us that transformation on the largest scale possible. You do not need to imagine the numbers. You do not need to picture billions of years. Only feel a very slow rhythm, slower than your heartbeat, slower than your breath. A rhythm not made for humans, yet gentle enough for humans to enter. Within that rhythm, distance is no longer frightening, because far simply means long ago. And long ago does not mean lost. It only means there has been time to soften. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "All things are bound together, all things are interwoven." Light moving against time is a quiet proof of that interweaving. No moment is truly separate. No memory is completely alone. And perhaps as you listen to this chapter, you are allowing your own sense of time to change. No longer divided by clocks, no longer pushed by tomorrow. Just a slow current where past and present can touch without causing pain. If your eyelids are growing heavier, it is not because you are missing anything. It is because the mind no longer needs to keep its distance. It has allowed time to move in its own way. Ancient light continues its journey. James Webb continues to listen. And you, in this moment, do not need to go anywhere at all. Only to be here. In a night quiet enough where distance has become time and time at last has grown gentle enough to carry you into sleep. If you are still drifting with the current of light from the previous chapter, perhaps a very strange feeling is present now. Not awe, but a deep settling, as when you realize that time is no longer something to chase, but something gently holding you. From that place, we enter this chapter, not by taking a step, but by arriving at a recognition. When James Webb looks toward the universe's earliest days, it does not see a fragile child, clumsy and unsure, struggling to learn how to exist. It sees galaxies already there, dense, luminous, bearing the form of maturity. It turns out the universe did not grow up the way we imagined. We once believed that everything needed a long time to become stable, that the beginning must be chaotic, delicate, easily broken. That order only arrives after enough collisions, enough trial and error. But what Webb reveals causes the old models to fall silent. They do not protest. They do not collapse loudly. They simply can no longer speak. Galaxies appear earlier than every prediction. They do not carry the awkwardness of youth. They are present as if they already knew who they were and where they belonged in the vast picture. This may unsettle you. Because human beings live with a similar belief that we need a very long time before we are allowed to be steady, that we must endure enough breaking before we can be called mature. But if the universe did not wait to become ready, perhaps we do not need to force ourselves into such rigid timelines either. The early universe was not as fragile as we thought. It did not tremble before its own existence. It did not hesitate. It organized itself very early, not through will, but through a natural rhythm. The philosopher Heraclitus once wrote, "Nature loves to hide." Perhaps the universe's maturity hid itself in the same way, not displayed, not announced, simply unfolding quietly before anyone was there to notice. When James Webb sees those ancient galaxies, what is most striking is not their size, but their familiarity. They resemble today's galaxies far more than we expected, as if the universe learned very quickly, or as if it never needed to learn at all. This touches a deep layer of reflection. For if the universe was already old while still young, then our idea of linear evolution may be nothing more than a convenient story. Martin Heidegger once wrote in "Being and time is not a thing, but the horizon within which being unfolds." Perhaps the universe does not move from youth to old age. Perhaps it simply unfolds into different forms upon the same deep ground of being. The old models once said, everything must be gradual, order requires patience, large structures cannot appear early. But Webb does not argue, it only shows. And in that showing, old assumptions fall away on their own like dry leaves leaving a branch when the season has changed. There is no crisis here, only a long silence in science. A silence not born of missing data, but of data that is too complete. And that silence, if listened to deeply enough, becomes healing. Because human beings too often exhaust themselves believing they are not enough, not experienced enough, not mature enough, not ready yet to be themselves. But the universe in its earliest moment did not wait for that permission. Carl Jung once wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "There is no linear evolution, there is only a circumambulation of the self." Perhaps maturity is not about going farther, but about arriving sooner at what has always been there. The universe's ancient galaxies did not need to become something else. They only needed to exist in their own rhythm, and that in itself created order. As you lie here, you may feel something similar within yourself, that you have passed through many things, that there are parts of you that are far older than your years, not because of weariness, but because they have learned when to be silent. The universe, as seen by James Webb, did not grow by fighting chaos. It allowed chaos to arrange itself, the same way sleep arrives when you stop trying to control it. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." Perhaps the universe always carried both chaos and order, youth and age within a single breath. James Webb does not say we were wrong. It gently reminds us that the stories we tell about the universe are always temporary, and when a story grows quiet, that is not failure. It is a sign that it is time to listen more deeply. If your eyelids are growing heavy, it is not because you are falling behind the story. It is because this story does not ask you to walk alongside it. It only invites you to stay with the feeling that the universe knew how to exist before anyone thought to ask it how. And perhaps you did too. If in the previous chapter the universe appeared as something that had already matured earlier than anyone expected, then what lingers now is likely a pause. Not confusion, but a very gentle stopping, like the moment you realize you no longer need to take another step in order to be at rest. From that pause, mathematics begins to feel unsettled. Not because it is wrong, not because its equations have collapsed, but because in a rare moment they are no longer gentle enough to hold everything the universe is whispering. James Webb does not create a loud crisis. It does not overturn tables or tear everything down. It simply brings light, and in that light, numbers suddenly fall very quiet. Equations that once worked flawlessly, models that once told the story of the universe with ease, come to a halt midway. They do not object. They do not resist. They simply cannot continue. And perhaps that silence is the most honest moment science has ever known. Mathematics is the language of order. It prefers straight lines, limits, balance. It loves systems that can be neatly closed. But the universe, when seen more deeply, makes no promise to fit perfectly into any language at all. Albert Einstein once wrote in Out of My Later Years, "As far as the laws of mathematics refer to reality, they are not certain. And as far as they are certain, they do not refer to reality." Perhaps this is the moment when that sentence speaks very softly, not to challenge, but to reassure. The numbers are not wrong. They are simply not enough. Not enough to tell the whole story. Not enough to soothe the feeling that the universe is a little more complex than what we had prepared ourselves to accept. And that lack of enough is not a failure. It is a necessary space, a space for listening. Modern humans live inside equations like these as well. We measure time with calendars, worth with numbers, success with charts. Everything appears clear until a vague feeling arises that cannot be expressed in any unit at all. You may recognize this right now, that even when everything is correct, you still feel tired. Even when every plan is reasonable, you still long to stop. The mathematics of everyday life is just as confused. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, "Whereof one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent." The universe illuminated by James Webb is guiding science very close to that boundary, not to enforce eternal silence, but to remind us that silence too is a form of understanding. There is no loud crisis, no panic in laboratories, only scientists sitting longer with their data, reading again, comparing, and accepting that some questions should not yet be answered in haste. This extended silence does not smell like stagnation. It smells like patience. Martin Heidegger once wrote in what is called Thinking, "Science does not think." He did not mean to diminish science, but to remind us that the deepest kind of thinking does not always take the form of formulas. And perhaps the universe is inviting us into another kind of listening, not abandoning mathematics, just setting it down for a moment to rest. Like when you stop counting your breaths and breathing finds its own rhythm again. James Webb does not ask science to abandon itself. It simply opens a space where old models are allowed to be silent without being called wrong. This is rare in the human world. We are often afraid of silence, afraid of emptiness, afraid of not having an answer immediately. But the universe here reveals a different kind of safety, the safety of not knowing. Carl Jung once wrote in Psychological Types, "The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem and the epitome of a whole outlook on life." Perhaps accepting that we do not yet have enough language to understand the universe is also a way of accepting ourselves. When equations are no longer gentle enough, they do not disappear. They wait. They wait for more data, more light, more time. And while they wait, we are allowed to do the same. You do not need to decode the universe tonight. You do not need to understand why everything does not fit perfectly. Only to recognize that this incompleteness is opening a very soft space where the mind is allowed to rest. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Human All Too Human, "The demand to be understood is the worst demand of all." Perhaps the universe does not demand to be understood either. It only asks to be seen, to be listened to, and to be left undisturbed. If your eyelids are slowly closing, it is not because the story has become difficult. It is because it no longer asks you to strain. The numbers have done their work. Now they rest, and so do you. Within the long silence of science, there is a rare gentleness, an unspoken permission. Not everything needs to be explained before we are allowed to sleep. The numbers are not wrong. They have simply stepped aside for now, so you may enter the night without carrying any equations at all. Only your breath, and a silence deep enough for everything else to gently dissolve. From the silence of numbers in the previous chapter, we do not fall into chaos. We fall into depth. Not the depth of space, but the depth of questions that do not yet require answers. It is there that black holes appear. Not loudly, not violently, not rushing to devour everything as human imagination so often assumes. James Webb sees enormous black holes when the universe was still very young. They were already there, heavy, steady, as if they had never passed through a youthful stage at all. This slows science down, not out of fear, but out of astonishment. We once believed black holes needed immense amounts of time to grow, that they must begin small, feed, gradually collide, merge, and learn how to exist within the universe. But what appears is different. They were already large before there was even enough time for them to become large, not through aggression, but through presence. Black holes do not hurry to consume. They do not chase light. They do not hunt matter. They simply remain. And it is precisely that remaining which bends the space around them. Perhaps what makes black holes so contemplative is not their power to destroy, but the gravity of the question they carry. A question without an answer. And perhaps one that does not yet need one. In human life, we often fear what feels too heavy, emotions that run too deep, memories too dense, thoughts without names. We are taught to process them, to resolve them, to make them disappear. But black holes do not do this. They do not try to become lighter. They do not justify their existence. They simply exist and allow everything else to adjust itself around them. Soren Kierkegaard once wrote in The Concept of Anxiety, "Anxiety is the dizziness of freedom." Perhaps black holes are a similar dizziness of the universe, not a sign of error, but a sign of depth. These primordial black holes did not need clear reasons to form. They did not ask permission. They did not wait for complete models. They did not wait for theory to be ready. They appeared, and the universe had to accept them. There is something strangely healing in this. Because human beings often ask themselves, why am I like this? Why does this sadness exist? Why are there parts of me that feel so heavy? But the universe through black holes whispers a very quiet response. Some things do not need reasons in order to exist. Carl Jung once wrote in answer to Job, "What we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate." Black holes are not pushed into fate. They are the fate of the space around them simply because they are present. And when presence is deep enough, everything else finds its orbit. Black holes are not destroyers of order. They are anchors, centers of silence, places where all motion must slow. In a world that constantly urges you to move forward, to respond, to explain, black holes represent another choice: to remain and to let questions exist without answers. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." But black holes reveal another possibility. Not all chaos gives birth to light. Some chaos gives birth to depth, and that depth is not frightening. It is simply quiet. James Webb does not show us black holes devouring everything. It shows us black holes that were already there very early on, as if the universe accepted heaviness from the very beginning. Perhaps that is why the universe does not collapse, because it does not try to eliminate the parts of itself it does not understand. Martin Heidegger once wrote in Being and Time, "The most thought-provoking thing is that we are still not thinking." Black holes in their own way do not invite us to think more, but to sit longer with what cannot yet be understood. If you feel there is a heavy place within you, a sadness without a clear cause, a nameless question, a deep but blurred sensation, you do not need to push it away. Black holes do not disappear. They give structure to the space around them. You do the same. When you allow an emotion to remain, it stops disrupting. It becomes a center around which other parts of you can find their place again. Black holes do not rush to consume. They simply exist. And in that existence, the universe learns how to move around them. If your eyelids are growing heavy, it is not because the story has turned dark. It is because you no longer need to resist depth. Tonight, you do not need to solve any great questions. You do not need to understand why some parts of you feel old before you had time to learn how to exist. Just know this: the universe allowed those black holes to remain. And perhaps you can allow yourself to remain with yourself in silence, in depth, and in a very slow peace that is gently carrying you into sleep. From the quiet depth of black holes in the previous chapter, we are not pulled further downward. Instead, a very different sensation begins to arise, the feeling of being supported, not by light, not by matter we can see, but by something far more silent: dark matter. James Webb does not see dark matter. No image reveals its shape. No color belongs to it. And for that very reason, it is easy to forget that most of the universe is held together by what cannot be seen. Dark matter is like the spine of reality. It does not display itself. It does not speak. Yet without it, galaxies would drift apart, structures would dissolve, orbits would lose their direction. There are things we only recognize when we imagine a world without them. In human life, we are often the same. We notice what stands out: words, actions, decisions. But what keeps us here is not always what can be named. There are thoughts you have never spoken, memories too faint to retell, feelings without matching words. They are there quietly, and yet they are precisely what keeps you from falling apart. Dark matter does not pull everything toward a single point. It creates a network, a distributed form of support wide enough for everything to have a place. The universe is not built around one center. It is held together by invisible connections, threads that are not tense, forces that do not impose, just enough to keep things near one another. Martin Heidegger once wrote in Being and Time, what is closest to us is often what we are least aware of. Dark matter is that kind of closeness. So close we cannot see it. So close we forget that we are being held at all. Human beings forget as well. We forget that there are days we remain standing, not because of any clear reason, but because an invisible structure is quietly holding everything in place. Small habits, unnoticed biological rhythms, connections that do not need to be named. They do not form grand stories, but without them, the story cannot continue. Carl Jung once wrote in The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, "The unconscious is not just evil by nature, it is also the source of the highest good. The dark matter of the mind is much the same, unclear, not bright, and yet it is what keeps consciousness from drifting too far away." James Webb. By observing how galaxies are distributed reveals that empty spaces are not truly empty. They are shaped by the gravity of what cannot be seen. Emptiness is not absence. Emptiness is space for connection. This can be deeply comforting in a world that convinces you that you must always be full of goals, full of motivation, full of answers. But the universe does not demand this. It allows empty spaces to exist, and it is precisely those spaces that make structures stable. Blaise Pascal once wrote in Pensée, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." Perhaps dark matter teaches a similar lesson. The ability to remain still is not a lack of energy, but a very deep form of support. You may sense this right now, that you do not need to think more in order to be here. You do not need to understand in order not to disappear. There is an invisible network holding you in this moment. Dark matter does not explain itself. It does not tell its story. It performs one faithful task: to hold galaxies together, to keep orbits from wandering, to allow time to continue flowing with a gentleness that holds. When humans are tired, we often believe we need more light. But sometimes what we truly need is to trust that a structure exists that supports us even when we cannot clearly feel it. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in The Gay Science One Must Learn to Love, perhaps love in its deepest sense is trust in what cannot be seen. Trust in holding forces that do not need daily proof. Dark matter does not promise certainty. It promises only this, that things will not fall freely. And perhaps that is the only promise we need to hear before sleep. If your eyelids are closing, let that happen. You are not letting go of the world. You are simply allowing the invisible web to do its work. No need to hold on. No need to control. No need to understand. only to know that even when you cannot see it, there are things still holding you here in this quiet night, in the slow current of the universe, and in the sleep that is arriving so naturally. From the invisible web that held everything together in the previous chapter, we do not step into a new space. We simply listen more closely to the rhythm of the universe and notice that this rhythm is not entirely uniform. There is a slight misalignment, not large enough to cause collapse, not loud enough to be called a crisis, but clear enough to make science pause and listen. The universe is expanding. That is no longer in question. But the rate of that expansion does not agree with itself. The Hubble tension is not a mistake, not a wrong number, not a careless measurement. It is more like a heartbeat out of sync when different methods hear different rhythms from the same heart. In this moment, the universe does not fully agree with itself, and instead of hiding that disagreement, it allows it to appear openly. There is something deeply human in this, because we too are rarely in complete agreement with ourselves. We carry desires that pull us forward and memories that hold us back. We have reason that measures and emotions that whisper different numbers. The human heartbeat is out of sync in this way as well. And still we live. The Hubble tension does not break the picture of the universe. It makes the picture deeper. Like a piece of music that is not perfectly steady, yet it is precisely that unevenness that gives the melody a soul. William James once wrote in The Principles of Psychology, "There is no perception without interpretation." Perhaps the universe too is being heard through different interpretations, and each way of listening is true in its own manner. When science measures the expansion rate from the early universe, it hears one rhythm. When it measures from nearer galaxies, it hears another. Neither is wrong. They simply do not align. And that lack of alignment is not something that must be erased immediately. It is an invitation. A very gentle invitation to remain with the question a little longer. In everyday life, we are accustomed to forcing everything to be consistent, to be clear, to follow a single story. But the universe does not do this. It allows multiple stories to coexist within one reality. Hannah Arendt once wrote in The Human Condition, "Understanding is an unending activity." The Hubble tension reminds us that understanding is not closure, but the acceptance of an unfinished process. The expansion of the universe is not a mechanical motion. It is more like breathing. Breathing does not need to be perfectly regular to sustain life. It only needs to continue. And the universe continues. This lack of agreement does not signal breakdown. It suggests that something else may be whispering underneath. A form of energy not yet named. A chapter not yet opened. But tonight we do not need to open that chapter. Because the most precious thing the Hubble tension offers is not the promise of new physics, but a very gentle feeling that uncertainty can be held without anxiety. Carl Jung once wrote in Psychological Types, "The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense, not between right and wrong. The universe oscillates in this way as well, between different understandings, between numbers that do not align. And within that oscillation, it still holds its form." You may feel this right now, that you do not need complete clarity in order to be here. You do not need to agree with every part of yourself to be at peace. There may be a part of you that wants to move faster, and another part that only wants to stop. These two rhythms do not cancel each other. They coexist like different measurements of the same universe. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in The Gay Science, Life is no argument. The universe is the same. It does not need to be consistent by the standards of human logic in order to continue existing. The Hubble tension does not ask us to take sides. It asks only that we listen longer, not to rush toward closure, not to force one rhythm upon all of reality. And in that listening, there is a deep healing. Because when you allow yourself not to resolve every inner contradiction, the mind begins to slow. Thoughts stop colliding. They move in parallel like cosmic currents that do not yet need to merge. If your eyelids are growing heavy, it is not because you are missing anything. It is because you no longer have to keep the rhythm for everything. The universe is keeping its own rhythm, and you are allowed to let go. The expansion continues. The numbers are still being measured. The questions remain open. But tonight you do not need to resolve the disagreement. You only need to know this: even when the universe's heartbeat is out of sync, it is still alive. And within that uneven rhythm, you can rest and gently close your eyes. No need for agreement, no need for certainty. Only allow imperfection to become a very slow lullaby, soft enough to carry you into sleep. From the gentle disagreement of the expansion's rhythm in the previous chapter, we are not pushed into tension. Instead, something very soft begins to spread, like the moment you stop trying to control your breathing and realize that it has been finding its own way all along. It is there that dark energy appears, not as a pulling force, not as a collision, but as a very slow act of letting go. Dark energy is not violent. It does not break things apart. It does not demand. It quietly pushes everything farther from everything else, gently enough not to cause panic, evenly enough for the universe to keep expanding. If gravity is the clenched hand that holds on, dark energy is the open palm. Without a clear purpose, without a complete explanation, just an endless easing outward, like sleep. Sleep does not arrive when we try. It arrives when we stop trying. The universe, after forming its structures, after accepting the depth of black holes, after allowing uneven rhythms to coexist, now does something very different. It lets everything drift apart. Not because it seeks separation, but perhaps because this is the lightest way to continue existing. In human life, we are used to thinking that holding on is love, holding tight, holding close, holding control. But the universe, through dark energy, suggests another possibility: letting go can also be a form of care. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Perhaps the deepest strength is not in gripping, but in knowing when to open the hand. Dark energy does not ask us to understand it. It does not wait to be named. It simply continues its work, giving space more room to breathe. And within that breathing space, the universe does not become empty. It becomes lighter. There is a very subtle comfort here, that not every movement needs a direction. Not every process needs a goal. Some processes only need to continue. When you are tired, what weighs you down is not a lack of motivation, but too much holding on. Desires not yet released. Expectations still clenched. Questions that do not yet need answers. Dark energy does not answer the question why. It does not participate in the story of purpose. It simply whispers very softly, everything can move a little farther apart without falling apart. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote, "In culture and value, problems are solved not by giving new information, but by arranging what we have always known. Dark energy does not bring new information. It only rearranges the distances between what already exists. That distance is not cold. It is gentle. It allows things not to overlap, not to press against one another, not to be forced into becoming one. The universe does not need everything to be close. It only needs things not to collide. Perhaps this is the deepest lesson of this chapter, that intimacy does not always mean closeness, that care does not always require proximity. Sometimes love is allowing space. Carl Jung once wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "In all chaos, there is a cosmos, in all disorder, a secret order. Dark energy is that secret order, unseen, unclaimed, yet keeping everything from falling into chaos." You may feel this right now. When you stop forcing the mind to be calm, it begins to calm. When you stop trying to sleep, sleep begins to touch you. The endless expansion of the universe does not cause it to disappear. It gives the universe a future, and your own small act of letting go tonight does not take anything away from you. It simply gives you room to rest. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "One must have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. But perhaps for that star to keep dancing, there must also be space wide enough that it is not held too tightly." Dark energy does not promise meaning, it promises space. And sometimes space is exactly what a tired mind needs. If your eyelids are growing heavy, let them close. You are not missing anything. You are simply allowing everything to expand in the most natural way. No purpose, no explanation, no holding on, just a very slow letting go, the way the universe is doing, the way sleep is arriving, and the way you can trust that even when you stop trying, everything continues with quiet gentleness. From the very slow letting go of dark energy in the previous chapter, the current does not carry us farther away. It carries us into closer attention, not toward emptiness, but toward worlds that exist quietly beyond familiar light. James Webb does not search for life as a victory. It does not arrive bearing flags to plant on distant ground. It does not ask, "Who is there?" It simply listens to atmospheres reading faint chemical traces the way one reads an unsigned letter. Those planets are silent. They send no signals. They offer no greeting. They confirm nothing and deny nothing. They are simply there, orbiting other stars within their own rhythms, unaware that they are being observed. This silence is not emptiness. It is a structured silence, with pressure, with composition, with history. And within that silence, James Webb does not search for life. It searches for possibility. The possibility of water. The possibility of a stable atmosphere. The possibility of chemistry, complex enough for something to happen or not. There may be someone there. There may not. And both possibilities are allowed to remain without being closed too quickly. This is very different from how humans usually ask questions. We want clear answers, yes or no, right or wrong, a period to end curiosity. But the universe does not end questions. It leaves them open. Carl Sagan once wrote in Cosmos, "Somewhere, something incredible is waiting to be known." He did not say it would certainly be found, only that it is waiting within the universe's long patience. Silent planets teach us a gentle lesson. Not every search needs a result. Not every gaze must lead to discovery. Sometimes to look without possession is already enough. James Webb reads atmospheres the way one reads poetry, not to analyze every word, not to rush toward conclusions, but to sense another rhythm of existence. In human life, we often stand before such silent planets, people who do not speak what they carry, relationships that never fully declare themselves, questions about ourselves that do not answer right away. We tend to think silence means lack of information, lack of emotion, lack of connection. But the universe reveals another possibility. Silence can also be depth. Martin Buber once wrote in I and Thou, all real living is meeting. Perhaps meeting does not always happen through words. Sometimes meeting is simply coexisting within a silence wide enough to hold both. Those distant planets do not know they are being used as mirrors for humanity to look back at itself. They do not answer the question, are we alone? They only soften the question. If life exists somewhere else, it is not a triumph, not proof for pride. It would only be another form of companionship. And if it does not exist, that silence is not failure either. It is a gentle reminder that life is already precious exactly where it is. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart." Perhaps in the universe, the act of searching for possibility is enough to fill human presence. James Webb does not search in order to conclude. It searches in order to remain with the question longer, to extend the moment between hope and uncertainty. That moment feels very much like the one before sleep, when you no longer want to know what tomorrow will bring, when nothing else needs to be resolved, when you can simply stay with the feeling that all possibilities remain open and you do not need to touch them. Silent planets continue their orbits, their atmospheres drift, molecules collide according to laws that need no audience, and here on Earth you are moving too within a very small rhythm, breath flowing in and out, heart slowing, thoughts thinning. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Philosophical Investigations, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." James Webb expands that language by accepting silence. And within that acceptance, the world grows wider. You do not need to know whether someone is out there in order to feel connected, because the deepest connection is happening right now between you and the quiet moment that is holding you. Silent planets do not ask you to believe. They simply allow you to rest from the need to know. If your eyelids are slowly closing, let that happen. You are not missing any discovery. James Webb will continue listening. The universe will continue opening. And you tonight do not need to search for life anywhere else. Just know this: there may be someone, there may not. And within both possibilities, peace still has room to arrive softly, like a silent planet drifting through sleep. From the silence of the planets in the previous chapter, the question does not disappear. It only becomes softer, like a cloud drifting slowly, no longer asking for rain, no longer asking for sun. What if we are alone? That question was once asked with great hope, with the desire to be answered, with the longing to hear an echo from afar to prove that human life is not a fragile exception. But the universe does not reply. It neither denies nor confirms. It remains silent. And within that silence, something very different begins to emerge. Not fear, but calm. The universe's silence is not judgmental. It does not say we are small. It does not say we are meaningless. It simply does not require us to prove the opposite. Perhaps the deepest exhaustion of being human does not come from having no answers, but from constantly having to prove that we deserve to exist, to deserve love, to deserve being heard, to deserve a place in the larger picture. But the universe, by not answering, does something very rare. It allows us to be present without evidence. It allows life to be life, not an argument. Jean-Paul Sartre once wrote, "In being and nothingness, existence precedes essence." Perhaps in the universe's silence, that sentence resonates in its gentlest form, that we do not need a grand essence to be permitted to exist. To exist is already enough. If we are alone, that does not mean we are abandoned. Aloneness is not exclusion. Aloneness simply means we are in a space where no other voices intrude, and that space can become a refuge. Human beings often fear silence because in silence we must face ourselves. No noise to distract, no grand story to lean on, only the heartbeat and the most honest questions. But the universe does not avoid this. It remains within its silence for billions of years, and it continues. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart." But perhaps even before struggle, what fills the heart is the permission to remain still without needing victory. If there is no one else out there, then the first and deepest relationship humanity can build is with life on this earth, with one another, and with ourselves. The universe does not answer the question, "Are we alone?" because perhaps that question does not need words. It needs to be lived with. Martin Heidegger once wrote, "In being and time being toward death is the way in which Dasein exists authentically." Recognizing finitude does not make life heavier. It makes each moment complete. If we are alone, then every touch becomes more precious, every breath more vivid, every quiet night a gift without justification. The universe does not give us an audience. It gives us a stage wide enough to exist without scrutiny. Carl Jung once wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Perhaps the frightening loneliness is not the absence of others in the universe, but the refusal to allow ourselves to be real within this life. And because the universe is silent, we are given space to learn how to speak to one another more slowly, more honestly, more gently. If there is no call from afar, then the call from within becomes important. The call to rest, the call to care, the call to not needing to be more than anyone else. Silence is not denial. Sometimes it is an open door opening into a life that does not require validation from outside. If your eyelids are growing heavy, let that happen. You are not running from a great question. You are simply allowing yourself not to carry it into sleep. The universe may not answer, but it does not turn away. It merely steps back enough for you to stand firmly within your own presence. What if we are alone? Then perhaps it is an invitation to live more slowly, to love more deeply, and to truly rest. No need to prove, no need to be seen from afar. Only to know this, even within this silence, you are permitted to exist. And within that permission, sleep arrives not as an escape, but as a return quiet, complete within a universe that does not answer, yet remains endlessly open. From the permissive silence of the previous chapter, we do not search for a new answer. we find a point of view, not the center of the universe, not a privileged position, just a very rare moment when the universe somehow looks back at itself through biological eyes. Human beings do not stand at the center. We have known this for a long time. But there is something more subtle. Even without being central, we are conscious. And that in a very quiet way is enough for the universe to recognize itself, not through words, not through intention, but through a presence that can ask. Carl Sagan once wrote in Cosmos, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." That sentence does not grant humanity glory. It grants a very gentle responsibility, the responsibility of seeing and of listening. Human beings are made of the same matter that once burned inside ancient stars. Calcium in bones, iron in blood, carbon in every cell, all of it passed through long cycles before becoming you and me. And then one day that matter learned how to look back. There is no center, no summit, only a very soft closed loop. The universe gives rise to matter, matter gives rise to consciousness, and consciousness turns back to ask about the universe. That question does not need a complete answer in order to have meaning. Immanuel Kant once wrote in Critique of Pure Reason, "Thoughts without content are empty. Intuitions without concepts are blind." Human consciousness stands between these two, between intuition and concept, between sensation and language. And in that in-between space, a very gentle kind of understanding takes shape. We do not look at the universe as an object. We look at it as a distant mirror. Every question of origin, every measurement, every image from James Webb reflects another question: who are we standing before the infinite? And the universe does not answer. Not out of indifference, but perhaps because that question does not require an answer. It needs to be carried. Martin Heidegger once wrote in What is Called Thinking, "The most thought-provoking thing is that we are still not thinking." Perhaps the deepest form of thinking is not adding answers, but learning how to remain longer with what is unclear. Within this flow, human beings are no longer conquerors, no longer observers standing outside. We become a point of contact between matter's blindness and the capacity to know. There is no center, but there is awareness. And that awareness does not need to be loud. It does not need to prove anything. It only needs to continue being present, like a very small lamp that does not challenge the darkness, but gives the darkness shape. In everyday life, we often grow tired believing we must be someone, leave a mark, have a story large enough to matter. But the universe does not demand this. It does not need us to be great. It only needs us to be here. William James once wrote in The Varieties of Religious Experience, "The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes. Perhaps the deepest attitude is allowing oneself to be a very small part of a very large whole without feeling erased." Consciousness does not separate us from the universe. It allows us to belong to it in a different way, to belong through an understanding that remains open. There is no center, but there are perspectives, many perspectives, and each one makes the universe richer. If we are alone in the universe, then consciousness becomes even more precious because it is no longer taken for granted. It is a rare phenomenon, a moment in which matter recognizes that it exists. And if we are not alone, consciousness is just as precious because it is how all life, wherever it may be, can touch the same question. Carl Jung once wrote in The Undiscovered Self, "Man is not a machine that can be remodeled for quite different purposes as occasion demands. Consciousness is not a tool, it is a space for experience, for reflection, for silence. Within that space, you do not need to do anything more. You do not need to understand the universe completely. You do not need to define yourself. Only to recognize this right now, the universe is looking back at itself through you. Through a breath that is slowing, through eyelids growing heavy, through attention softening and no longer gripping." Blaise Pascal once wrote in Pensée, "Man is but a reed, the weakest in nature, but he is a thinking reed, fragile yet enough for the wind to recognize that it is blowing." If your eyelids are closing, that does not make consciousness disappear. It only changes its form, from thinking to sensing, from questioning to presence. There is no center, but there is awareness. And that is enough for the universe to recognize itself very softly, very slowly, through a human being resting in this quiet night. You do not need to carry any concepts into sleep. Only to know this, your presence, even in silence, is already a way for the universe to continue looking back at itself. And in that recognition, sleep arrives not as the extinguishing of consciousness, but as a very gentle continuation, where knowing and resting are no longer separate. From the moment the universe looked back at itself through human consciousness in the previous chapter, the current now slows even further. No new questions arise. No new discoveries need to be remembered. What remains is something very subtle, the feeling that comes when we stop trying to understand. Throughout this journey, we have passed through ancient light galaxies old before their time, silent equations, heavy black holes, invisible networks out of sync rhythms of expansion, the letting go of dark energy, silent planets, and the question of aloneness. Each step could be measured in light years, in billions of years, in probabilities, in data. But here, all those numbers begin to slip from your hands, not because they are wrong, but because they are no longer needed. The true scale of the universe is not found in size. It is found in experience, not in how vast you know the universe to be, but in how quietly you feel yourself existing within it. The universe does not ask you to remember. It does not wait for you to memorize concepts. It does not test whether you have understood correctly. It simply opens and allows you to be inside it in the most natural way. Ludwig Wittgenstein once wrote in Philosophical Investigations, "Understanding is not a mental process. Perhaps the deepest understanding does not happen in the mind, but in a very different state, the state that arises when the mind stops gripping. When we try to understand, we create distance between the observer and what is observed, between me and the universe. But when we stop trying, that distance dissolves slowly like mist fading when the night grows deep. And in that moment, scale is no longer an issue. You are no longer small. The universe is no longer too large. These ideas lose meaning when there is no one standing outside to compare. Martin Heidegger once wrote in Being and Time, "We are always already in the world. We do not step into the universe. We have been in it from the beginning. We simply forget this sometimes because we are too busy measuring. Modern life often exhausts us because we carry too much in the mind. Information, goals, conclusions. But the universe does not ask you to carry anything into the night. It does not say, "Remember this." It only whispers, "Stay." Stay with the breath as it slows. Stay with the feeling of the body being supported. Stay with a very simple truth: you are here, and that needs no reason. Albert Camus once wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, "The literal meaning of life is whatever you're doing that prevents you from killing yourself." But perhaps on a gentler level, the meaning of life is simply the ability to remain still without needing to escape. The true scale of the universe does not overwhelm you. It settles you. Not because you fully understand it, but because you accept that you do not need to. And within that acceptance, the mind begins to rest. Carl Jung once wrote in the Red Book, "The soul does not exist without mystery. If that is so, then not understanding everything is not a failure, but a condition for the soul to live." James Webb has given humanity many images, but the deepest thing it offers is not an image, but a feeling. The feeling that the universe is not a problem to be solved, but a space in which to be present. And presence requires no effort. You do not need to remember what you heard in the previous chapters. You do not need to assemble them into a system. You do not need to carry any discovery into sleep. The universe does not grade your memory. It does not ask you to bring ancient light or enormous numbers with you. It asks only one small thing: that you know you are within it. Blaise Pascal once wrote in Pensées, "The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me." But perhaps when we stop trying to understand, that silence is no longer frightening. It becomes a very wide blanket laid gently over a tired mind. If your eyelids are closing, it is not because you are missing something. It is because you have arrived at a place where there is no need to go further. True scale is not a number. It is the feeling that arises when all efforts to understand are set down as lightly as placing aside something that has been held for too long. The universe does not ask you to carry anything across the threshold of sleep. There is no test, no final question, only a very gentle truth: you are in it. And within that sense of being held, sleep does not arrive as a loss of consciousness, but as a quiet merging into a scale that does not need to be measured, does not need to be understood, only felt very slowly, very peacefully, until all thought dissolves on its own into the night. And then, after having traveled so far, farther than any vessel ever launched from its pad, farther than the familiar light of the sun, farther even than the questions humanity once dared to ask, the current begins to turn back. Not because the universe has run out of things to say, not because its mysteries have been resolved, but because there is a place very small, very near, very familiar, quietly waiting for you to return. Earth. A small planet unremarkable among billions of galaxies, holding no central position, bearing no special mark on cosmological maps, and yet the only place for now where you can breathe. After all the light that departed before Earth even existed, after ancient photons drifted through billions of years of darkness, after galaxies old before their time, heavy black holes, invisible forces, out of sync, rhythms of expansion, you are still here. Breath still moves slowly in and out. Your body is still supported by a familiar surface. Your heartbeat continues steadily, unconcerned with whether the universe is expanding quickly or slowly, and perhaps this is not accidental. Marcus Aurelius once wrote in Meditations, "Never forget that the universe is a single living being with a single substance and a single soul. If the universe truly is a living whole, then Earth is not a mistake. It is a very subtle resting point, not a place to conquer, not a place to escape from, but a place to remain. Human beings often dream of other planets when they grow tired of this one, yet that exhaustion does not come from Earth itself. It comes from the way we live upon it. Earth has never asked you to understand it. It does not demand that you explain your existence. It quietly provides the conditions for you to be here: air to breathe, water to drink, gravity gentle enough to keep you from drifting away, yet not so strong as to crush you. Throughout this journey, we have seen the universe as something immense. But here, scale grows smaller, no larger than a darkened room, no broader than a breath growing deeper. There is nothing to add, nothing to carry forward. Earth does not ask you to become someone else. It does not ask you to prove your worth. It does not require you to contribute to cosmic history. It asks only that you be present in this very small moment. Simone Weil once wrote in Gravity and Grace, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Perhaps a gentle attention to the present moment is the most tender gift you can offer the world and yourself." Staying with Earth does not mean abandoning the universe. It means accepting that the universe chose one very specific place for you to experience it. Not at the center of a galaxy, not on a distant world, but here, now. Albert Camus once wrote in The Plague, "The struggle itself is enough to fill a man's heart, but sometimes there is no need to struggle, only to stop and breathe." If you feel small before the scale of the universe, remember this: the universe set aside a planet stable enough, gentle enough, enduring enough for a fragile being like you to exist and to think about it. That does not make you grand, but it allows you to belong, not by ownership, but by harmony. Earth does not speak loudly. It does not tell great stories. It simply repeats very old rhythms day and night, waking and sleeping, inhaling and exhaling. And within those rhythms, the mind can rest. If you have followed this journey all the way here, perhaps you no longer need another answer. No need to know where the universe is going. No need to know how long humanity will last. Tonight, the universe does not ask you to understand it. It asks only that you remain with the planet that has nourished you long enough for sleep to arrive. Blaise Pascal once wrote in Pensée, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." And perhaps tonight is a rare opportunity to do exactly that, to sit quietly, without fleeing, without searching, without explaining. Just here, on a small planet, in a darkened room, with breath becoming steady. After all the ancient light, you are still breathing here. And perhaps that is not coincidence, but a very gentle invitation. An invitation to stay with Earth, to stay with this body, to stay with this night, and to let sleep arrive the way this planet continues to turn quietly, without needing to prove anything, without needing to go anywhere else, just to stay.